welcome to another Fuds on Film podcast. My name is Scott Morris, and I'm joined today by Drew Tavendale.
Good evening.
And Craig Eastman.
Hello.
Today, we've decided to talk a little bit about some films that were inspired by, but not directly based on, video games. It's something we've had knocking around for a while, but I guess it came to my mind again when I saw the trailer for Ready Player One and spent a few days unproductively reading that novel, which was no good whatsoever.
It is not a good novel.
No, but Scott, it's a list of things from the 80s with a very, very loose linking mechanic. It's clearly the best of things.
I think that's why I got through the book so quickly, because every chapter there was at least 3 pages out of 6 dedicated to just being one big long list of stuff that I just skipped over.
Yes, so. I can confirm I remember these things.
I didn't read the book, I listened to the audiobook at double speed. The audiobook, which is indeed read by Will Wheaton, as if it couldn't be any more of a ridiculous pop culture geek thing from the 80s.
Yeah.
Add in Wesley Crusher as well. Yes, it is not a good book, so I'm not looking forward to the film because it is just a list of references.
Yes, that brought back this little theme of a couple of films we could actually have chosen. Surprisingly, there's more than 2 for this, but we decided we'd spare you a trip to Gerard Butlerville with a gamer.
I did wonder about that.
Yes. So these 2 are, well, maybe not more enjoyable, but probably have a bit more merit in discussing.
Yes, and also, we were originally going to consider Gamer in here, as Scott mentioned, but I particularly requested that we replace that with Tron so that Craig and I could come to blows once again over 1982 sci-fi films.
I will not be rising to that.
You're no fun.
Right, so we will start off, I think, with Tron, and that's me, so over to me. Hi. Yes, Tron. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. In this instance, 1982 is a foreign country, and the USA is also a foreign country. I've not thought this through. It was getting confusing. What I'm trying to get at is that Disney's Tron came out in 1982, which in terms of computer technology development might as well be categorised alongside the Abacus. It feels as though Tron needs little introduction, but I should bear in mind that new non-Tron aware humans are created by the day, and on its release, Tron rather underwhelmed, so some introduction at least seems warranted. Kevin Flynn, Jeff Bridges, runs that most missed haven of our youth in arcade by day, while trying to hack into the systems of his ex-employer Encom by night, hoping to find the proof that he needs that he'd been defrauded. Fellow employee Ed Dillinger, played by David Warner, stole the games he'd been working on and released them to great success and acclaim, quickly rising to become the face that runs the place. Flynn has sympathetic friends still at Encom, chiefly Bruce Boxleitner's Alan Bradley and Cindy Morgan's Dr. Laura Barnes, but he's unable to penetrate the firewalls of the Master Control Program. In artificial intelligence, Dillinger was using to consolidate control of various computer systems both inside and outside of the company, but it rather seems as though the MCP may now be running Dillinger rather than the other way about. Convinced that the only way through the security will be to physically access Encom's network, Flynn convinces Bradley and Baines to sneak him into the facility. At this point, fans of computer science and physics accuracy in movies had better stop listening. While Flynn's poking around, the MCP fires off an experimental laser that digitises Flynn and drops him into the computer system, represented here as a bunch of dudes and dudettes wandering around in neon outfits doing something, I suppose? While the jackbooted thugs of the fascist MCP police state keep most of them in a state of terror. Singled out for particular attention are those computer bots who still profess to believe in the users responsible for their creation, what with their hokey religions and ancient weapons and whatnot. What follows is, well, not quite what my motherboard's troubleshooting guide tells me happens inside computers, but suppose it'll do. Flynn is captured and thrown into a series of gladiatorial games where he fights for his life, before being busted out by Tron, Boxleitner, Bradley's security program, kicking off a chase that sees them try to shut down the MCP while avoiding the forces arrayed through a variety of means that make for interesting enough set pieces but don't stand up to an awful lot of academic rigour. A solar sail simulation? What? Tron, it turns out, is one of those films I'm convinced I've seen a dozen times, but it turns out to be a dozen different 10-minute stretches when it was on telly before changing the channel to find something a bit more interesting. So it turns out this might well be the first time I've watched it from start to finish. I don't think I appreciate it all that much more from seeing it in context, to be honest. It's not that I dislike Tron, and indeed there's a few things to like in here. The actors are all charming enough in their roles, but primarily the film's selling point is, of course, the visual effects, which are abstracted and stylized, so much that they hold up pretty well today, I think. I think primarily because it's worked out a pretty cohesive visual language for the computer world and stuck to it, that it's convincing, if not realistic, if that makes any kind of sense. It's legitimately impressive to this day. Certainly it doesn't seem all that less visually interesting than 2010's Tron Legacy, which, given the strides effects work has made since then, is pretty remarkable. Unfortunately, most of the other aspects of Tron I am somewhere between not bothered with or actively disliking, which very much brings the average down. Actually, the only thing I really dislike is Wendy Carlos' soundtrack, which I do not get on with at all. It sounds like a synthesizer being tortured with a cello, but I could get over that if there was some kind of compelling narrative to back it up, but Tron's is, well, not nonsensical exactly, but a pretty close relative to nonsensical. It's just a bunch of fetch quests leading to a boss battle, which I suppose fits the inspired by a video game theme quite well. However, given that for all their supposed narrative sophistication, you can't call a decent film from modern video games, what hope do you have of pulling one out of light cycles? The standard discourse in Tron these days appears to be to give it plaudits for its groundbreaking effects work and ignore everything else, and if you can somehow attune your expectations accordingly, then there's some merit in watching the film. However, it's a narrative wasteland, and it rarely displays any sort of human emotions, so there's not a great many levels in which to enjoy it, other than the visual. Honestly, you'd get the best of this film by watching a trailer for it on YouTube. End of line.
Okay. It's fine. I make no argument for it, but I really like Tron. I've always really liked Tron. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole again of discussing all the reasons why I like Tron. As a yarn, I think it's great. The 10-year-old in me really still appreciates Tron. I can look at it now and understand it's not a great movie, but I find enough in there that harkens back to my youth, and purely from a nostalgia input point of view, I still really enjoy Tron. I hadn't watched it in some time, up until last week in prep for this, and even at that I watched it very much skimming through while I was doing other things, because I feel it's one of those films I'm just familiar enough with. But I'm not going to stand here and defend its honour in the face of critical analysis from someone such as yourself, Scott, who I'm not going to suggest you don't have the faculties to deal with this film appropriately, and I'm certainly not going to argue it's a great film, because it's not. I just really, really enjoy it as what it is, empty calories. And one can understand why people make an argument for it purely from the standpoint of aesthetic. It's very annoying in this day and age, very much how words like literally have been misappropriated. So too has the word iconic. And actually sifting through all of those references to how iconic certain stuff is to find something which is genuinely iconic is becoming increasingly more of a chore by the day at this point. But I think there's a pretty good argument in Tron's case that visually speaking, it's an iconic movie. There are other films which might be as visually distinctive as Tron in its world building, but I don't think there are any films which are more visually distinctive. I'm always open to corrections there, of course. If anybody feels differently, please let me know. But I still think, yes, purely from a visual standpoint, if one is able to disengage one's brain effectively, you can still just enjoy this film purely from a visual standpoint. And as you say, Scott, it is consistent enough in its through line visually that really, and its style is so far removed from anything else at the time, and both sort of quite simple in a sense but complicated at the same time, that it has aged incredibly well, more so than many, many more recent films. And of course, marking as it did a super early deployment of CG in movies, one would expect straight away that, well, of course, even Jurassic Park looks, is starting to look a little bit dodgy around the edges these days. But actually, in Tron's case, stylistically, it plays into the world building aspect of the film, and it has survived remarkably well. So yes, I'm not going to make any great argument as to why you should listen to me and not anyone else. I just personally still really, really like Tron, and that's enough. I will not fight you, Drew. I will not fight you.
I'm very disappointed, Craig.
Please, Drew, I don't want trouble.
Yeah, I remember in the past quite vehemently disliking this, but I think that's the exaggerated, unnecessary emotion that comes from the times of adolescence, which would have been the first time we really spoke about it, Craig.
I think you were just really hoping to get a rise out of me.
What, tonight?
No,
well, back then.
Previously.
No, I really actively disliked Tron, although I know it lasted certainly a bit beyond adolescence, because I do remember you forcing me to borrow your
until
20...
as recently as like last year or something.
I remember you pretty much forcing me to borrow your 20th anniversary DVD set to watch it again,
Yes.
and that was within 2002.
Yes.
So that's...
Don't make me press this DVD into your eyes, Drew.
and I still didn't appreciate it then. I didn't like it much. I'm kind of pleased, I guess, to find that on having watched it a few weeks ago in preparation for this, that I still don't like the film, but I found something to appreciate this time.
I'm pleased to not like this.
No, I'm not pleased to not like it, but I'm pleased that I wasn't like all I thought about. To be honest, the biggest downside of this film was that it did bring about Tron Legacy, which, while it had considerably improved soundtrack, also had the floaty head Jeff Bridges, which still gives me nightmares. But this film, it's an interesting artifact, if nothing else, because it is the early days of both CGI and of computer games, really.
Yeah.
And, when arcades really were such a big, big thing, and it was before the computer game crash, so video gaming's first heyday. And it's an obvious thing, sensible thing to have made a film from then, and I think they actually did a passable job at it. Yes, the narrative is... Well, yes, the narrative is definitely there, just. But I kind of get where they're coming from. They're trying to explain to people the idea of how a computer works, and with a way that's considerably less well understood than now, less commonly known.
I would debate explaining it.
Yes, well,
I mean, what they've done, which is, you could take this narrative and apply it pretty much beat for beat to any sort of standard fantasy trope. Like, they're going to see the Oracle, they've got to get the magic MacGuffin, they've got to use the magic MacGuffin to kill the bad guy, right? So they've taken that
basically
sort of
it's the
narrative
Wizard
setup.
of Oz with CGI.
Yeah, they've just taken that and sort of applied it to sort of vaguely computerish terms.
Yeah,
and
they've rolled it across a chopping board, dusted with like random computing terms, and they've seen what stuck to it.
Yeah, and I kind of like the concept. On paper, I like Tron. I like Tron more than the actuality of it, I think. I can see where the ideas were coming from, and as I say, completely respect the visual achievements that they come up with for this. But yeah, as a film, I just can't quite get behind it.
I think it's the lack of sophistication in its narrative skills, right?
That is, yeah. Certainly visually, there are interesting things there. It's a bit Spartan, and I mean that's certainly partly to do with the basic CGI available at the time, because a lot of the other stuff is things that were shot in black and white and then rotoscoped. Yeah, that was all just old school techniques, and then you get the strange things. As Scott mentioned, the solar sailor. Why? I don't understand what that was for either. But those CGI, the tanks and things, and they're very basic, certainly by today's standards, even by just a couple of years after Tron, I think. But even just the skill of doing the
Have you seen a stealth helicopter? We are tending toward Tron.
But what is actually quite interesting, I watched the Blu-ray of this a couple of weeks ago, and actually in high definition, I think because it's so, in some ways Spartan, but everything's so sharp that it actually looks really, really good in HD. It's so kind of crisp and clean looking, and it's actually done. Some films, a high definition transfer kind of shows up. Tron actually benefits from it, which is just kind of interesting side note there. For the rest of it, the big problem I have, and I don't have this sort of vehement dislike that I used to have in my younger days, but it's just boring, and that's my biggest problem with it. It's not very interesting, and I wouldn't have known it at the time, and it's such a long time since I've seen it, I hadn't thought about it. But I'm watching it, and Bruce Boxleitner's in it, and I'm thinking, I really just wish I was watching Babylon 5 instead. And then Peter Jurassic turns up, and I really wish I was watching Babylon 5 instead. It's like, you've got Peter Jurassic and Bruce Boxleitner on screen at the same time, and I'm watching Tron and not Londo Mollari and Sheridan. So, yes. But yeah, it's an interesting thing cinematically, both in terms of the techniques they're starting to use, the introduction of CGI into mainstream films. Disney taking a chance in a film like this is actually quite interesting, and also the fact that at the time it's when video games are starting to get, I mean they're quite big by the end of the 70s, but before Atari and everybody else crashed.
Yeah, I was going to say,
yeah, as the first, when the pre-video game crash, before Nintendo resurrected everything, it's kind of an interesting time period, and as a historical artifact, I think it's quite interesting. I just wish it was more interesting. And the only other good thing I have to say about Tron is that it did create those arcade games, including the Light Cycle game with the big roller ball, which I found fascinating as a 5-year-old.
And I have to say, the most surprising thing perhaps at this point about Tron is that given the current gen of VR technologies has now been rammed down our throats for the past couple of years, that someone hasn't jumped on the Tron bandwagon there. We haven't had, to the best of my knowledge, a current gen Tron VR game, which would seem to be...
That'll be Disney licensing, I suspect.
Yeah, you'd like to think it would be a fairly obvious choice, but yeah, I guess Disney licensing, you're right. Oh, that mouse. Shall we talk about Avalon?
Sure, why not?
Why not? From Mamoru Oshii, the mind behind anime series Ghost in the Shell and Pat Labour, among others, cometh Avalon. Named for the Isle of Arthurian legend that homes the spirits of brave warriors slain in battle, this Avalon is an online VR game that occupies a good deal of society in the apparent near-retro future of some indeterminate Central European state. Poland. It's Poland.
They speak Polish.
They speak Polish. It's all in Poland. It's Poland. Accessed via appropriately over-engineered headsets, the game world is an escape for great numbers of a disillusioned populace, and the best players can even make something of a living out of their pursuits. On the other hand, ill-judged sorties into missions highlighted as being of particular danger can leave players severely mentally afflicted or unreturned in the real world. Our nominal hero of the piece is Ash, and allow me to absolutely murder this actress's name here, Malgorzata Formiak, a young woman with quite the reputation as a warrior-class character in the world of Avalon. Formerly a member of a renowned team, Ash now plays alone following some mid-battle discord that left her team leader, Murphy, quadrispazzed and on a life glug, though she is eventually drawn back into the clan life as details emerge of a hidden Special A class level that can only be accessed by the most elite of players and which can only be escaped by completion. Failure, in this instance, is very much not an option. Avalon was Oshii's first non-animated venture, and it is immediately obvious that his anime mad skills do not necessarily translate into the live-action format. I was able to see Avalon back in 2001 in a limited engagement at a cinema in Edinburgh, and I immediately found engaging with the characters and setting nigh on impossible to the point that I fought to stay awake. No surprise there, I probably hear you two saying... But this wasn't some late night screening, this was a mid-afternoon screening. I had hoped that this, my first viewing since then, might have yielded some greater satisfaction. Surely my nascent critical faculties had missed something on that first pass which my more informed adult self would appreciate. No? Shot on the super cheap in Poland? No. The answer is no. Shot on the super cheap in Poland, presumably as a function of Oshii's fascination with tanks and hind helicopters, and those things being... available at their cheapest rates in that locale. Avalon is at once visually distinctive on account of its then inventive Caffeinol and Vaseline glamour glow filtered sepia tones, though the fact that Apple started including this look as a live filter in its devices a couple of years later has probably somewhat prematurely accelerated the aging process of this particular aesthetic. The European architecture sits well within the overall look, and in terms of approximating the multiplayer map environment of any number of online shooters, it's a decent attempt. Again, it's just a shame that this hasn't remained as timeless as it might have done. If the movie is, visually at least, a decent attempt on goal, then less successful is the choice of score, a ponderous orchestral affair that continually evokes Arthurian imagery without actually having much point, and on more than one occasion seemingly serving only to pad out the running time as characters walk interminably along featureless corridors. Corridors? Corridors as well.
Colanders?
Stern colanders, all that type of stuff. Stern-faced and vacant. My suspicion is that Oshii imagined such indulgence might bring great unspoken emotional resonance to what is otherwise a largely uninspired, emotionally disengaged story, but it does not. It just makes such scenes seem like really pretentious student catwalk shows. Chief among Avalon's failures, however, is that it just doesn't have much reason to exist. While Tron succeeds as a ripping adventure yarn with an iconic visual aesthetic, Avalon has absolutely no such credential, and in terms of story, it certainly has little if anything to say about an emergent human condition precipitated by the advance of technology. It's a bit of a letdown to say the least, especially when you consider that it was Oshii's first work in 6 years following the seminal Ghost in the Shell. I still feel as though I'm missing something here, but I'm judging by your reaction, Scott, you would suggest I am not.
No, I had much the same reactions to you both then and now, and it's probably, I think the disappointment's even more crushing because I was very much in my early days of a film appreciation career, if you can call it that, but yeah, I had at that point seen Ghost in the Shell and loved it, so a new film from both Mamoru Oshii and Kazunori Ito. I'm on board with that, and was really looking forward to this. And it was it's a bit of a damp squib. There's not really anything in this film. I think, again, echoing with Tron, visually I think it still more or less holds up. I'm not quite so enamoured with that filter, I think, just because it has been a bit played out, but it does kind of capture the first-person shooter aesthetics of the time quite well. Yeah. And some of the action scenes where it's, the effects work in that is kind of also quite stylised and works reasonably well still. I've no real complaints with that, but everything else, there's something about the way that Oshii's approached this that just doesn't work. You can see the shots that would work well enough if this was an anime.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the way things are framed, the sort of staticness of some of the shots and the way things are going.
Very anime.
Yeah, I get the feeling that would work really well in an anime, but it just does not work with live action for whatever reason.
Someone in a billowing cape with a huge rifle sort of shot at a Dutch angle against some sort of dilapidated building in the backdrop is something which you can imagine looking quite stunning in an anime setting, but here it's just like, oh, right, that's Poland shot through an iPhone.
Yeah. And the characters in Ash, at the start, it kind of comes across quite well as a sort of mysterious lead for this sort of thing, but it never goes anywhere. You never actually learn anything about her past or her future of any real consequence.
It turns out this is just the way she behaves in general, and it's not all that engaging for a protagonist.
Yeah, and I don't have all that much to dislike about the film. I don't hate it, but I just watched it and was a bit nonplussed by it. But like yourself, I feel that it's grasping for something. It feels like there should be some thematic.
Well, I think because Oshii keeps he keeps reaching for this sort of visual symbolism, and it's things like the recurring motif of and it was something he carried through his anime works as well. The image of the basset hound and for no reason other than that apparently he likes basset hounds. But the way it's presented in this, you would assume it's got some sort of, you would assume there's some sort of significance there which you are just missing, just a slow tracking shot on a poster that said, not a tracking shot, just like a slow zoom in on a poster for about 5 minutes, which is a poster for the orchestra. I was going to orchestra event. Why do I feel like I've completely bypassed an absolutely normal word there?
Concert?
Yes, concert. That's the word I'm looking for. The poster for the concert at the end of the film, which just says Avalon with a picture of the basset hound's face. And they're quite happy. We're quite happy to push in for about 10 minutes on this poster as though it's got some great significance. And clearly it hasn't. It just feels like he's trying to force significance through repetition of this stuff. And it's like the number of shots which are reused in this. I keep thinking to myself, is there some significance to the reason why we keep seeing the shot reused of Ash on the tram home at night? And there isn't. It's just one has to just assume it was because he only had $8 million to play with here.
So he just included lots of travelling scenes.
I assumed it was
just to bulk out the game. Yeah,
to do with like the repetitiveness of her non-game life.
Yeah,
but
you could read that into it, but I honestly think for the vast majority, this is a decent short film or an engaging enough short film that has just been padded out purely for reasons of saying, well, it's not a short film now, it's a film. And it suffers from so much by way of, you have to wonder what audience they intended this film for, because on that budget and with this thematic matter, this is not a broad spectrum appeal film, right? So you have to assume that the target audience are already familiar with the mechanics of gaming, etc. And yet, this film has to explain everything, either via direct dialogue or, worse yet, voiceover. Every little, supposed nuance that I'm quite sure we could pick up on has to be heralded by this Games Master figure, or conversations between Ash and Stunner, for example. And you're just thinking, wait, are you asking me or telling me? I already know this stuff. And I'm assuming you are targeting yourself at an audience who would already know this, so why are we wasting time with this crap? Just crack on with it.
I kept wishing or thinking that Games Master guy looked awful like Peter Mullen. I kept wishing he was Peter Mullen. I remember the three of us going to see this at the film house and all having seen Ghost in the Shell all be quite excited, and I was the only person that did like it. Turns out that's still the case then. I don't remember quite why I liked it. I just remember that I did. And this time I liked it less than I remember liking it, but I still liked it, and I'm not sure why. It's definitely not something intellectual, because all of your complaints about it are absolutely valid, and I wouldn't disagree with any of them. The all those static shots of people standing along balconies and things, and it feels like an anime in live action. And as soon as you transpose one to the other, it looks stupid. Frankly, it doesn't work. And certainly for the first half of this film, when I rewatched it recently, I was struggling to get into it, and I was thinking, okay, maybe I just don't like this anymore. But by the end, something emotionally felt different for me. And I was like, by the end of the second half of the film, I was like, yeah, I still really, really like this. I find that kind of affecting, and I'm not sure why. Not a particularly useful thing to try and tell people when we're talking about films, but it's absolutely bypassed any sort of intellectual feeling about it, because there's like those irritations, like you mentioned, Craig, with the voiceover and the explanations of things, and that horrible brown filter is really visually wearing. So maybe just by the time it turns into colour at the end, it's like, relief. Maybe that's why I like it more. But
I still think visually, like at the time, I think it was a decent decision on Oshii's part. I think he's been unfortunate there, just in the way that like smartphone technology and stuff has developed. if it hadn't quite gone down that path, we might still look at this and go, well, on a super limited budget, it was a sensible sort of visual choice to make this film appear somewhat timeless. I guess it's just a real shame that we have this fascination with filters now, and that exact filter is just a thing that has become like just
so blasé.
Yeah, just like absolutely omnipresent stuff. So I just that's a shame. It feels like that was one thing the film might have had going for it, and then rewatching it now, I'm like, oh yeah, this really hasn't aged well at all. I don't remember it being this sort of twee visually, but I think that's probably just the way our perception of that stuff has maybe altered over the last years, rather than any fault of the films on its own. On another timeline, this film might still look quite visually distinctive, and I do really like that whole thing of when the action freezes at the completion of a level and stuff, and then stuff being snatched as bitmaps straight off the Z buffer kind of thing. That's still an interesting little aesthetic thing. But I seem to remember them doing more with that the first time. There actually wasn't that much in game per se action as I remembered this time. It is for the most part just a film about people sitting eating porridge and talking to each other about really boring stuff. And the problem with the action scenes in it are, as anyone who has ever sat and actually watched someone playing solo through a first-person shooter, it's great while you're taking part in the action, but as a spectator sport, and I know millions of Twitch users will disagree, but certainly when it comes to solo stuff, as a spectator sport, it's not that engaging to sit and watch someone else playing a video game when they're the one having all the fun.
No, I've never understood the appeal of live streams and things, because I don't like watching other people play games at all, because it's just not interesting. I love playing them myself, but I don't get the appeal of watching other people do it.
I do think 100 years from now, when VR does actually finally take off, I like to think it'll be this version of it, where you're just basically spazzed out on a sofa wearing some sort of aborted Jamiroquai concept hat. But apart from that, I really don't think this film has got anything to offer whatsoever.
I don't know. I'd probably only myself recommend it to maybe not even just anime fans who are kind of interested in seeing how it translates to live action. It might even only be the subset of Mamoru Oshii completists, and even then this is probably skippable for me. I just think it's dull, and I couldn't really connect with it, and I don't really know what it was trying to say, particularly when it does that sort of left turn in the final act, which it was quite successful in throwing me for a loop, and I felt, it's going to say something interesting here, and then it didn't. I couldn't mine anything from it, and it didn't really connect with me. The characters, possibly I was just too bored by the first half to really sort of give it a chance in the second half and have it create any sort of emotional connections that it's true. But yeah, I just by that point I'd pretty much checked out, if you know what I mean.
The only interest I would have in watching this again would be, I understand that the US print has an additional voiceover part at the end, which, to somewhat patronisingly explain to apparently a US audience exactly what was happening at the end. And my problem with that is that I don't think anyone doesn't understand what's happening at the end. I just don't think there's any point to it. It's not saying anything.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what part of it is, but whether it's like saying something about the nature of reality or mundanity of real life or something like that. There's just something in that second half. somewhere sort of inside it was having some sort of effect on me, but I don't think I could recommend it to most people. And as Scott says, maybe for Mamoru Oshii completists, maybe. So I got a lot more out of it than either of you, but it's because I even is while I enjoyed the second half, that first half is a slog.
Yeah.
It's visually oppressive. I mean, because that aesthetic, and say at the time, yeah, more interesting choice than now. It seems so kind of tired now, but even if that, it's just become so oppressive to have that. It's basically monochrome, but it's gold rather than black and white. But it's quite visually wearing.
Listen, I just think from a perspective of everything that this film is trying to represent, it's not even that it almost does too good a job. I just think it's really ineffectual what it's doing. Before I had children, I used to spend an awful lot of my free time gaming, playing stuff online. A lot of time playing online, like routinely, like 5 hours a night. Do you know what I mean? Much more than I should have done. And I wouldn't have said that I was living the life of an international man of mystery, right? But even my life was not as mundane as this. And when I was playing stuff online, I was a lot happier and having a much more exciting time than anyone playing online in this. So I'm not sure what this film is trying to say. I just don't get it. I actually, the more I'm talking about it now, this is one of those where normally we sit here and I say, the more I think about this, the more I'm convincing myself actually I enjoyed it more. Actually, the more I talk about Avalon, the more I think I absolutely goddamn hated it. Are there any films that have pulled this off successfully then? The sort of portrayal of gaming? And if so, what have they done differently that these films haven't? Because to my mind, I think there might be some sort of fundamental issue here in that we're dealing with two separate mediums that operate on different level and perhaps never the twain shall meet. But at the same time, with the way, in certain respects, these technologies of the way are increasingly converging, right? So there has to come some point where there will be the perfect union of game and film. And it will be a revelatory experience for all involved. But I can't imagine yet what that might be if we are still at a stage where we cannot make an interesting film out of gaming culture yet.
I can't think of any, and to be honest, I'm not sure there ever will. It's tough to know what aspects of playing a game you could translate into being on a movie that would make any sort of sense, and that wouldn't end up just being some sort of relationship drama about people playing a game, at which point it could be a relationship drama about people doing pretty much anything.
Yeah,
It'll be a David Cage joint, won't it? Yeah. Oh God! Oh Jesus Christ!
Yeah. But I can't see a film made about the act of playing a game ever being in any way successful, because it's just not something that would ever. Yeah, it's not a narrative that would compel anyone other than the person playing the game.
Yeah.
So yeah, and there are games for that. So
it's a bit redundant. Get things like Hardcore Henry, which are trying to get that sort of idea, but really it's more just an action film with a very distinctive point of view. It doesn't really give anything about games. It's like, yes, you can see that it's inspired by first-person shooters, but it's not really doing anything special with that. And that film is actually considerably less nauseating than I expected it would be from the trailer. But it's sort of just you're seeing it from a first-person perspective, and that's kind of unusual, but it's not.
I was going to say it's literally just an action movie through a GoPro, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. Pretty much. I mean, I suppose it does pull off an incredible trick of making Charlton Copley vaguely tolerable for 90 minutes, which I would have hitherto thought impossible.
Harsh, man. That's harsh.
Have you seen Maleficent? Oh,
no, I haven't actually.
Don't, because you will be offended forever by the accent Charlton Copley uses.
Is that the one he does a Scottish accent in?
No, I don't know what country it's from, but it's not here. I mean, that's what people think it is, but I being Scottish, I know what they sound like, and no, it's not. But you will just be offended.
Your accent is from the other place. No, did Oshii do any other live action movies after this, or did he just revert back to anime type? Because I don't think this was critically all that well received.
No, I think this one kind of went quietly into the night. I don't think he has.
Because I would never discourage someone. I'd never say you should never attempt this again. But on the evidence of Avalon, I certainly think he would need to go and regroup and rethink live action movie making a great deal before he entered that realm again. Unless, I don't know, maybe he was really happy with this.
Oh, actually, thanks to the wonders of Wikipedia, he did actually do it for a couple of non-animated films before then: The Red Spectacles and Stray Dog Kerberos Panzer Cops, which
Of course.
another live-action film, Talking Head, back in 1992. So all that would have been before it. But after this, he went on some The Animatrix, Skycrawlers.
That's interesting then. That must have been only sort of shortly before Ghost in the Shell then.
2012, he was announced to write and direct military science fiction thriller Garm Wars: The Last Druid. Another live action film in 2015. Live action microseries in 2017. So yeah, no, he's keeping up with it.
All right. Interesting.
Yes.
Well, I shan't necessarily be seeking any of those out. I think my advice with this would just be go back and watch Ghost in the Shell again. You're never going to be disappointed, are you?
Well, Kerberos Panzer Cop does have a couple of sequels: Kerberos Saga Rainy Dogs and Kerberos Panzer Jaeger. So, just saying. Yes, but like yourself, I'm not going to be beating down doors to see those. Although I suspect I may, as you know, I have so much respect for Ghost in the Shell that I may actually wind up watching those at some point down the line. But yeah,
I've not
it's not
seen
on the top of
anything-
my agenda.
Yeah, I've not seen anything by Oshii since
No.
the Skycrawlers.
Mhm.
That's 10 years
Likewise,
ago now,
yeah.
really.
I think I haven't seen anything since the Ghost in the Shell. What was the Ghost in the Shell sequel?
2.0.
Ghost in the Shell 2.
Was it 2.0? Yeah,
Innocence,
I think that
yeah.
was the last Oshii joint I saw. I shall
Oh,
wait.
yeah,
If you're,
Ghost in the Shell 2's and this is Ghost in the Shell 2.0 is the remake of Ghost in the Shell with CGI
Yeah,
instead.
just to keep things nice and
so
simple.
Innocence then, yeah.
Yes,
Innocence.
24's Innocence, yeah.
So if you guys do end up checking that stuff down the line, I'll wait for you to report back before I decide whether it's worth my while investing in it.
Oh, really? It's just looking at his timeline though. Ghost in the Shell was 95. His next film was Avalon, and then his next film was Ghost in the Shell 2, and that's all he did in 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like, he considered Avalon a big step there, I think.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There you go. He's very much retreating back to what he knows.
So I guess that will wrap us up for tonight then.
Uh-oh.
So thanks very much for your attention. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can do on a number of vectors. You could use the Twitter vector. We are there at Fuds on Film. You can see us on Facebook, facebook.com/fudsonfilm, or indeed email podcast@fudsonfilm.com. And yeah, we'll be back with you another 10 days where we talk about some random films that we've seen this month. But until that time, it's a goodbye from me, and a goodbye from Drew,
Very well.
and a goodbye from Craig.
Bye-bye.
Ta-da!